Chapter 1. We ought to esteem it of the greatest importance that the fictions which children first hear should be adapted in the most perfect manner to the promotion of virtue. Plato. Did you ever get the feeling that you were riding a wave of greatness? A feeling where, even though the events of your life up to this point had led themselves to amazing and incredible things, you somehow knew in the deepest parts of your soul that more was just around the corner. Young couples often feel this shortly after their wedding, as they are settling down into their new normal. Politicians regularly feel this shortly after winning elections, and each and every new employee at a new job looks forward to the future with eager anticipation, knowing down deep that they will remain excited and pleased with whatever the future has to offer. But then, as is often the case with the human animal, the newness of the experience wears off, and once again we are left gazing toward the horizon. This dichotomy of the human spirit is often blamed for men sailing away on ships to new worlds. But the male species certainly has no monopoly on wanderlust. Psychologists call this pattern of thinking hedonic adaptation, which is defined as the tendency of us mere humans to quickly return to a relatively stable level of happiness, regardless of whether the events or life changes experienced are either positive or negative. With Jason and Dennis single-handedly having saved the entire human and Galimarian races by utilizing the XYZT transportation device, or simply the portal, as they like to call it, our heroes quickly found themselves having to get used to new normals as well. Actually, all in their close circle of friends and acquaintances had a lot to get used to now. Once all the Galimarian people had been awakened from their slumber in the underwater habitat by Jason, Dennis, and the rest of the team, each individual eventually returned to their respective lives, albeit with a considerable amount of interest in what their lives would now be like. Jason and Mickey, on the other hand, returned to their home in Sonora, California, along with their son Jace Jr. Being that Mickey was now privy to all that Jason did professionally, it wasn't unusual for Jason to discuss with her various events of the office. This new normal between the two of them, though, took a little getting used to, since his work was so secret. Even 99.9% of all personnel at the Pentagon had no idea that the facility where Jason and Dennis worked even existed, let alone that the portal existed, or that it had the site-to-site transportation and time travel capabilities that it had. Even so, while it was now allowed for Jason to talk about the technology that he worked on with his wife, by presidential decree, by the way, they had to be ever diligent in keeping things incredibly secret. This whole secrecy thing was actually a bit strange for Mickey, and it took a little while for her to get used to it. Since she now had a security clearance that many in the top intelligence agencies of the United States didn't even know existed, one requirement that the president put upon Mickey was that she had to take a crash course on exactly how to treat top secret and sensitive information. The classroom course she took was held at the Pentagon, and her classmates were some of the more elite in the various bastions of military intelligence. As Mickey sat in the classroom, there was more than one occasion where she spied sideways glances from the other majors, lieutenants, and captains in the class, who were wondering why someone who appeared to be your garden-variety young stay-at-home mom was even there. One and all had participated in side discussions amongst themselves as to how she could possibly need to be in such a position to handle top-secret intelligence. One and all felt that there must have been some sort of clerical mix-up to land her in such a class. And one and all were thoroughly and completely wrong. her knowledge of the island of New Galimar, and her conversant knowledge of the Galimarian language meant that along with her husband, she was an indispensable asset to the office of the president. After relations had been established with the Galimarian people, Dennis decided to take some time to connect with his new romantic interest, that of Patricia Lynn Marlowe, or Lynn, as she liked to be called. Dennis's hand was still a little stiff after having suffered the bullet wound from Admiral Brinstock's sidearm during the showdown in the portal room between Jason and the Admiral. The injury was healing nicely, though, and Dennis wanted to introduce Lynn to some of his family back in his hometown of Tomball, Texas. He was more than gratified to see her fit into his family dynamic like a glove, and it took all of about 30 minutes for his dad and mom to take him aside and inform Dennis that he had better hang on to this one and not let her get away. Lynn had to go through the same security classes as Mickey. In fact, Lynn was a student in the same class. She didn't raise the same number of eyebrows as Mickey, though, since Lynn had a military background, though she was in the reserves, and so that did happen to strike some of the others in the class as slightly odd. Jose settled into his new occupation, that of being the sole owner of a huge vineyard in Spain. This occupation was bittersweet for him, since the land he now owned was the same land where he had been born some 700 years before. It was the same land where the preponderance of his memories had been forged. However, it was those memories that left him somewhat melancholy in the evenings. He remembered playing with his boyhood friends along the river that cut through the valley in the middle of the real estate he owned. He remembered evenings by the fire, as he listened to his mother hum while she prepared the evening meal. He also remembered having to lay his mother to rest in a spot that hadn't been touched in the last 700 years. It took him a little while to locate the gravesite, or what was left of it, but when he did, he cleared away the brush and rendered it as a shrine to a woman for whom he had great respect. From the moment they laid eyes on each other, Terry and Crelon were very much in love, and truly enjoyed the time that they could now spend with each other. President Michelson requested that Terry take on the job of being an ambassador and field representative of the President of the United States to the island of New Galimar, and the presidential liaison to the ruling body of New Galimar, known as the Grand Council. Terry was humbled and reverently took on the job given to her by the office of the president, much to the chagrin of her supervisor at the New York Museum of Natural History. Up to that point, the supervisor had hoped Terry would be on board long enough to complete the job of cataloging the inventory in the massive downstairs museum archives, and so now he had to find someone else to do the job. As a side note, it was slightly comical when the museum administrator then turned to Lynn, asking her to take on the archive project, only to discover Lynn's own resignation on his desk. Lynn had decided to work closely with Dennis, and with her military background, she became a secondary liaison between the Grand Council, the President of the United States, as well as the Pentagon. Terry and Crelon decided to split their time between living in her apartment in Brooklyn Heights, New York, and living in Crelon's apartment on New Galimar. Any time they wanted to move back and forth between the two, all they had to do was ask Jason or Dennis to fire up the portal, and voila, they were in their other apartment. After the events centering around Yellowstone and the demise of Admiral Brinstock, President Michelson had a lot to consider. He was now the only sitting president that had ever made contact with beings of another planet, and that in and of itself naturally led to the need for new foreign policies that were decidedly different in nature than any other policies that had been drafted before. The political engine behind him had already been making plans for his re-election, and so it came as quite a shock to his political party constituents when he declared that he would not seek re-election, even though the campaign trail was almost done and over. The party had to scramble to offer up a replacement candidate, but there were many that were more than a little angry that he had backed out. This move all but guaranteed that his campaign rival would win the presidency, which in fact he did. Before leaving office, though, President Michelson created an office for himself that would be in charge of relations with people of other planets. The existence of this office would be known by only an elite few. Even the incoming president wouldn't learn of its existence until a few weeks after he had taken the oath. Now that Admiral Brinstock was no longer alive, his former office had to be filled, and that was done rather quickly. The president had told the Secretary of Defense that the admiral had been part of an undercover operation, and that during this mission he had lost his life. President Michelson felt that any more information needn't be shared with the Secretary, and so a military funeral ensued in honor of the fallen soldier. In a short discussion between President Michelson and Admiral Brinstock's assistant Lieutenant Flume, who had continued as the assistant to the new Deputy Chief of Naval Operations, it was discussed how, even though Admiral Brinstock had the psychological break that he did, causing him to be guilty of some definite crimes against the state, there was still an entire naval career where he had served his nation admirably. This was reason enough to see to it that there would be an honorable memorial held in his honor, and even though there was nothing to bury, a casket holding his uniform and various other medals and diplomas were lowered into the ground at Arlington National Cemetery. And so, such was the life of those who had been part of the greatest adventure ever experienced by any human up to that point. While millions of people interested in such things fantasized on what it would be like to meet and interact with beings of another planet, Jason, Dennis, and the rest of the team actually had the pleasure of living that dream. Even to them, it was surreal to wake up in the morning and know that you had been instrumental in the survival of not only your own species, but even that of another planet. It was nothing short of amazing to all of them. The Galimarians understood what it was like, though. Their race had stretched out into the cosmos many years before, and had met other races themselves. Their interactions with these races led to some of the most enriching and fulfilling relationships and interactions ever. All interactions, that is, except for one. This one particular contact with a species of another planet was actually the first planet where Galimar had discovered intelligent life. It was events on this same planet that caused some of the most sweeping changes to the main body of laws followed by all Galimarians. These laws, known as the Testimony of Galactic Land and Maritime Law, dictated that Galimar would only share its advanced technology with races that had socially developed to the same level as Galimar. It ensured that such technology wouldn't end up being in the hands of people that might use it for purposes that were less than virtuous. What could possibly have happened on that planet to cause such heartache on the part of all Galimar? What heartache caused the Grand Council of Galimar to change their foundational laws? The answer to these questions came from events that happened many years ago in the distant past of Galimar, in a solar system far, far away. Hey, fellow Galimarians, this is Dan Adrian, and I just wanted to say thank you for listening to my book. If you can, please click like down below, because it really helps me bring these videos to you and lets me know what you like. Also, if you haven't already, please subscribe and click on the bell so that you'll get notified when I release more chapters. If you have any questions about this or any other of my books, or if you want to know more about what it takes to write a novel like this one, please make sure you leave your question in the comments below. Thanks again. I'll see you soon.